Welcome everyone to another Artist Loft Drawing 101 class. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and we do not have any participants this evening, so there will not be any questions to interrupt, but I'm just going to dive right into part 3 of this 4-part series on creating a mixed media perspective drawing. So the supplies for this class there was a long list of supplies. We had the Artist Loft sketching pencils, which we began our sketch with, a ruler, a synthetic eraser, and then last week we worked with the illustration pens on the Artist Loft watercolor paper. And tonight we're going to be creating a watercolor pencil palette using the watercolor pencils and the Artist Loft paintbrushes. You'll also need a paper towel and a water cup. And that is it for this evening. Any work that you make from tonight's class or from previous classes, you can tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. So if you attended the previous classes, we created this mixed media layout, and then last week we added the pen and ink to our sketch. We also taped it down using some blue tape. So if you have not done that, then at this point you would tape it down, but mine is still taped from previous classes. And so we're ready to work on our palette, watercolor pencil palette. So I've got the Artist Loft watercolor pencils here, and I'm going to grab, I just realized I do not have a blank sheet of my Artist Loft watercolor paper, but it's right behind me, so I'm going to grab that real quick. We're just going to take a blank page of the watercolor paper and our reference photo, which was included on the supply list as well. We've been working with that same reference photo for the previous 2 classes. And if you're just joining us for this class and you did not attend the previous 2 classes, you can find those on YouTube under Artist Loft 101, Drawing 101, and Mixed Media Perspective Drawing Part 1 and Part 2. So Part 1 was the pencil layout. Part 2 was adding the pen, like I said, and then now we're on Part 3. So, but all of those we're using the same reference photo. So to create the mixed media, the watercolor pencil palette, we're just going to look at this photograph and begin to pick out the colors. If you've never created a palette before, you get started on adding color to a piece. I'm going to walk you through creating a watercolor palette for just this specific photo. So I'm not going to go into color theory or anything like that, like I would in a typical class where I'm teaching someone to create a palette for themselves. I'm going to show you how to create a palette for just this photograph, and then same rules would apply to creating a palette for anything else. The reason to do this beforehand is so you have practiced how you're going to create all of these colors before you move to your final paper, just to test them out and see that all of the colors are going to work together. So I've already done all the hard work for us here. We're going to end up with something that looks exactly like this, and then we'll begin to add color to our pen sketch from last week, and then what we don't finish tonight we will finish in part 4. So this is the part where I would ask if there are any questions, but we don't have an audience. So I'm just going to dive right in. So the first thing I'm going to do is just look at the colors that I have in my photograph. And you always want to work from the background forward. So in our sketch here, we've got the sky would be the background. And then we've got the trees in the middle ground. The grass would also fall into the middle ground, the house as well. And then the lights, the fence would be considered the foreground because they're in front of the house, the fence is in front of the grass, etc. So we're going to work from the background forward. So the first thing we're going to create our colors, mix our colors for would be the sky. So it would make sense to use blue here, but I wanted to emphasize and create, more interest on this sky. So I made it more of an indigo purple. Even though the sky may appear a little bit more like a dark blue, I used mainly lavender and what did I use on this sky? Well, let's just dive in and see what sort of colors we would mix to get a sky like this, or a sky similar to that sky. So I'm going to take my lavender watercolor pencil from the Artist Loft kit, and I'm just going to color or shade or create some tonal shading here on the side of the pencil and keep it nice and soft. And then I'm going to add my dark blue to that. And I'm going to label what colors I'm using off to the side here. So I've got lavender and dark blue. And then I'll take one of my paintbrushes and my water cup. And I'm using the round paintbrush. It really doesn't matter which paintbrush you use here. And I'm just going to add some water to it and see how those colors blend together. So you can do exactly like I'm doing, or if you want to go rogue a little bit and use a different color on your sky, you can do that. But once you've added some water to mix these colors, then you want to let it dry. So you don't want to add too much water to the watercolor. You really want to create a nice little swatch and then blend it and then leave that alone. So if you want to add in more color to it, I mean, you can start to add it with the watercolor pencil just to see what will happen. Sometimes it will blend nicely into it, but it can get a little funny if you do too much. So I like to just do a little bit and blend it and then leave it alone. Kind of let it wash together. Okay, so that will be our sky. The next color palette that the next color swatch is for the house. So the house is sort of a light blue and a gray here. So I'm going to use my light blue first, or you can use the gray first. And again, you can use different colors for your house. You don't have to use the same colors that I'm using. but if I mix the light blue and the gray together and then blend that, I'm just using the same paintbrush the whole time here. I'm just cleaning off my paintbrush and maybe dabbing it against your paper towel before you mix them together. The reason to do this separately on a separate piece of paper before doing it on the final piece here is just to get a sense of how these colors are when they mix together and test them out first, because if you've never used watercolor pencils before, it's good to see what's going to happen before you do it on the final paper, especially since we've worked so much on this particular piece. So I'm just going to move some things out of the way here. Just have my reference photo and my palette on screen. Okay, so the next color I wanted to test is just the gray by itself. So that was the light blue and the gray, and this is just the gray. As part of this house, we might use just gray, and part of it we might use the light blue and the gray. So we want both tested here. And I always like to create a palette like this every time I work on a painting or a mixed media drawing. And that is because if you leave it to just color mixing as you go along, you might end up using a color that's a little off. And I like to just pick out all of the colors that I see in the photograph and find out how to make all of those colors before I go in. That way, when I'm starting to fill in the color, then I already know what I'm doing and I don't have to, you know, struggle in any way. All right, so those were kind of the easy ones, the sky, which we can kind of be a little free form if we want. You could make a pink sky, you could make a purple sky or indigo sky like I'm doing, or just keep it simple. The reason I wanted to add the purple was because I'm using so many blues on the house and I wanted the sky to stand out separately from the house. So, and I thought the purple and the green popped nicely together. Okay, so but the trickier colors that I'm seeing in the photograph are this glow that's happening around the lights. So we'll get to that one in just a minute, but we'll do the grass first. So we've got the gray and the emerald green on the grass. And on my emerald green, there are so many lovely colors in this Artist Loft kit, or the Artist Loft watercolor pencils, and they definitely do the hard work for you by having so many colors pre-made here. We're not having to mix them using a watercolor kit, and that makes it a little easier on us. So when I mix the gray in with the emerald green, it just kind of tones down the green a little bit and makes it not quite so bright. It's a really lovely bright green that comes across. All of the greens are nice in this set. The emerald green felt like the right choice for that grass. So that's the emerald green and the gray. Okay, and then next, I tested the dark green and the gray, but I'm not sure that I actually used those in the final the final drawing that I made too much. Maybe a little bit down here, but I'm gonna leave out that color swatch this time. But the next one that we definitely want to test is how to create that glow. So I've got white, ivory, dark pink, golden yellow, and dark brown. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors that I mixed to get that glow to happen. And some of those may seem like they don't show up, but they definitely were all used there. So first, we've got the ivory, the white, or I'm sorry, the ivory is this peachy color here. So we've got the white first, and I know that doesn't show up when I put it down, but it's very essential there, and we get a nice solid tone going. The other reason to do the color swatch so much is that we're getting a lot of practice on how to create these tones. Maybe when you're practicing with them, it's not coming across like this nice little wash that I'm getting. So the more you practice creating one, the more that's going to happen for you. So I've got the white and then the ivory on top of that. Take my dark pink, and I'm being careful not to overlap them too much. I'm kind of blending them as I go. So I'm making the pink on the outside, because in my photograph where that glow is happening around the colors, I'm seeing that pink around the white and the ivory haziness. So I want the pink to on the edge there. And then we need the golden yellow. And again, that's sort of hugging the pink and the ivory white. So we're imitating that glow in the swatch here. And we want a nice even tone of all of these colors throughout. Then a dark brown on the outer edge. Brown. There you go. And that's just because around the glow, I've got a lot of contrast from the background. That dark brown all the way around the edge. Okay, that's looking nice just with the watercolor pencils alone, just doing them direct, but then when I add the water and blend them together, clean my brush halfway through that. You can start from the outside, or the inside and go out, or the outside in. They will all kind of blend together like this. So it maybe will take a couple of layers to get it to blend the way you want. If the dark colors kind of went into the middle too much, you can blot them out, because definitely when we do this on the final paper, we may have to do this a couple of times to make that glow happen. So that is our practice swatch here, and I'm just going to write those colors again with my pencil instead of putting them in all the different colors like I did there. So it was the white, the ivory, dark pink, golden yellow, and then the dark brown. So it's a lot, but there's a lot going on with that glow. So, okay, the next swatch is for the trees. So in that tree line, I've got a really dark green happening. So I want some black to come into the emerald green. So you can do this either way. You can do the black first or the emerald green first. I'm going to go ahead and do the black first. Or you can also try doing the black a little heavier on one side of your swatch and letting it be a little lighter on the other side of the swatch, and then alternate how between the dark green and the light green, or alternate between a heavier application of the emerald green and a lighter application of that emerald green. Oh, I grabbed the dark green instead of the emerald green. Here's the emerald green. So half of the swatch is going to look a little different, but that'll be good. Maybe you want a different green to happen in your tree. And by all means, you can do this with every color in this watercolor pencil set and see, you know, if you want to change up the colors a little bit. Okay. So I'll label that. Dark green, emerald green, and black. And the last color swatch that I have here is the light blue, ivory, and lavender. I'm looking at the photograph and wondering what that was supposed to indicate. I think that might have been this house in the background that I ended up leaving out, or maybe, oh yeah, it is the part of the house that is all aglow around the lights. So, and then there's a couple of things that I didn't make a swatch for that I will. The fence mainly is what I'm seeing there. Okay, so there's a bit of a glow around the lights, obviously on the house. We've got, you know, more of a dark gray on parts of the house that are not as glowy. And then on the part of the house that is a little more glowy, we've got that lavender and ivory coming in a little more. So it's the light blue. And then the ivory, which is that peachy color. Yeah, that ivory is really important to making that glow show up on the house. We need to get that ivory color going because that's what's the reflective light that's coming off of those lights on the fence creates this very peachy glow. So that's why we need so much of that ivory to happen with the light blue and the gray. But I'm going to use gray and lavender. Let's see what that looks like. So that's the light blue and the ivory. It says that I added lavender next, but I'm going to add a little bit of gray to that as well, because the rest of the house is going to be mostly light blue and gray. We can use more or less gray in areas where it's glowing more. And then I added the lavender since I used lavender in the sky. That made sense. So I'm getting a nice even application of the watercolor pencil. If you're just using, oh, didn't quite clean off all the green on my paintbrush. I'm mainly using the same paintbrush for this. You can switch around and use different paintbrushes if you'd like, just for the swatch. Mainly using the same paintbrush here, but I just switched to a flat brush. Okay, so something like this is what we want for the part of the house where we're getting more of a glow. And if it's not glowing enough, then we can add more of that ivory color, or we can let it dry and then do that. We're definitely going to have a lot of layers as we work on this piece, which is why I wanted two parts for the color application, because if I rushed it too much and we just did all of the color application in an hour, it's unlikely we're going to have the full dimension to the color that we're seeing in this example. And I just, as an artist, always work in lots of layers, and watercolor takes, even watercolor pencil, when you're adding water to anything on watercolor paper, it's going to take a bit to dry. So we want to allow for that drying time and before we add another layer. If you rush it too much and start adding multiple layers before things are dry, the paper can start to get kind of pilly and do things that you don't want it to do. The other reason to allow for drying time is what we're seeing at the top of the palette right now is what just naturally occurs when you use any type of watercolor or watercolor pencil, is you get this little bleed line that happens. Some people really enjoy that bleed line, and other people want to make it disappear and make it kind of seamless. And the way that you can make it, you know, more seamless or make that bleed line disappear is to just add another layer and allow that layer to dry, add another layer, allow that layer to dry, etc. So this is probably 4 or 5 layers on here, and then once it was totally dry, I added more details with my pen. So I wanted to allow for that at the end. So that's why we've got a second part to this color application. So let me go ahead and label what I did here. So now that that's, and also these colors look so much different when they dry versus when they're wet. Like you're probably noticing, if you're doing this along with me, that some of these colors looked different when you first added the water, and then as they're drying they look even more different, and then when they're completely dry they look yet different again. But let me, before I forget, label what I added to this one. So it was the light blue, the ivory, the lavender, and then I added some gray to it as well. Okay. So, and then there's one other color that I mentioned a moment ago I wanted to add to this palette that we didn't, I didn't have in this list, and that is the fence. So I think I'm just going to use a light brown, a dark brown, and that ivory color, or you could also mix in your medium brown as well. Light brown first. So this is for the fence in front and the fence in the middle of the two houses. And then the dark brown. And then the ivory, because it's got a lot of glowiness happening on the fence. And maybe the white as well. But I think those are good for now. So let's see, light brown. Medium brown. You could add the dark brown as well, and then the ivory. separate those a little bit. Not the most beautiful palette ever, but that's okay. Okay, so something like that for our fence. I just wanted to make sure we tested that out. Okay, I think we're ready to get started on adding some of these colors, the first layers, to the final drawing paper here. Excuse the noise of me opening a sparkling water here. It's so quiet in my studio. Okay, so we're working from the background forward. So I'm going to start with that lavender color and using that same tonal, get the camera to point towards the top of the paper here. So we've got our paper towel handy nearby in case we do anything on the final paper that we consider a mistake. You can grab it out with the paper towel. And I'm using that same, the side of the pencil, and we want just a nice even distribution of that lavender everywhere that we see sky peeking through the trees and all of the keyhole spaces. So just keep my reference photo nearby for reference there. So I'm using the same amount of pressure on the watercolor pencils in this entire area so that it feels all connected. Okay, so I had lavender and then dark blue. So I know a lot of folks who are following along with me right now might, as you're adding one color, might want to go ahead and see what that looks like on your paper when you add water to it. But try to be patient if you're blending two colors together, and go ahead and put the other color down at the same time, because if you rush it and add the water for each layer, then just keep in mind that your paper can only handle so much water weight. So you can let it dry completely, but even then it's hard to go back and capture the magical thing that happens when you blend two colors together on the paper on the first pass. It's hard to recapture that that thing that occurs when you blend two colors together for the first time on paper. And so if you add the water immediately and then try to make something like that happen, it maybe won't happen quite the same. So you can test that out and see for yourself and see what you think. Maybe you will disagree. There is always room for your preferences, but I think blending those two colors and getting a more dynamic blend to happen. And even if you want to even do it again, because I know sometimes when you're watching me on screen, it maybe looks like I'm not doing quite as much as I am. So maybe adding filling in those keyhole spaces and doing it again for you might make a difference. The less watercolor pencil you lay down, the less color you're going to have to blend with the paintbrush. And when I've seen beginning students or younger students who've never worked with watercolor pencils before use this, sometimes they don't have the same effect occurring in theirs that is happening in mine, and they're like, well, what did I do wrong, or what did I do differently than what you did? And it's that right there. It's that I, maybe the screen didn't pick it up quite as much, but I really put a nice even layer of both of those colors, and then I went back in and added more lavender on top of it. It's very similar to, if you have been following along in these classes since July, when I talked about tonal shading and using the blending stumps, how sometimes people will rely on the blending stump a little too much, and they will just put a tiny bit of graphite shading down and then go to blend it with the blending stump, and it feels like they're just kind of smearing around that same little bit of pencil, because they are. And the more pencil you put down, the easier it's going to be to blend. So it's the same thing here. Your watercolor, your water and your paint brushes are only going to go as far as you have, given them to go with the color. So really get as much color on there as you can. Okay, and then I think I'm just going to stick to that round brush and go ahead and fill that in with my paintbrush, and that should just blend so nicely now that I put so much color down. And it's coming across a little more blue than purple. And so that's making me remember just how many layers of that purple I must have put on there to get it to come out that deep indigo purple color. So I'm going the same direction with my paintbrush as I add that layer on there, and just softly blending using the same loaded paintbrush of water for most of that. I'm mostly just kind of gently touching the area where I put the pencil and letting that natural bleed happen. So if you just get the paintbrush wet and just kind of lightly touch those areas, if you've got enough color there, that should just naturally bleed on its own. But if you didn't put very much color there, then it's, going to have less to work with. So that's why it's so important to get a nice even tone of those colors going. Okay, so next we're going to do the tree line. And that was the emerald green and the black. And you can do whichever one of those first that you prefer. The trees, we want to create a little bit of a texture as we layer those. So we're going to follow the texture that we started to create with the pen and ink last week. And we can always go back in and add more pen and ink. That was still a little wet right there. It kind of bled, but I'm using some hatching lines as I apply this, just around the edge of the tree line. We don't have to do that throughout the whole tree, but just near our pen lines, kind of imitate the texture of that jagged line. And then in the middle, you can just fill it in however. But along the edge of the tree line, we're going to imitate that same texture. So kind of a jagged hatching line here. And then I extended my tree line down here because I took out that other, well, the tree line is still there in the photograph as well, but I took out this part of the house. I know some folks in the last couple of classes put everything in there, and some people turned their paper horizontal and really stretched out that fence. There were a lot of lovely examples at the end of class last week, how people were choosing to organize this referenced photo. And I'm really excited to see how everyone's turned out, since a lot of people are using my same reference photo here, or even if you're doing one with a different reference photo, I still want to see how these are turning out. So even though we don't have participants in the class this evening, as you complete these from the recording, please tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels, or tag me at Adrian Hodge Art on Instagram so that I can see how these are coming along, or after next week's class, the completed ones. Okay, so I got a little bit of texture going in the edge of the tree line there, and then I'm just kind of filling in the rest of the tree with a bit of a scribble technique. But you just want to be consistent with whatever you use. So if you use that hatching texture thing throughout the whole thing, just be consistent with whatever you do, or be consistent in the areas where it's blending. So if you run into any wet spots like I did, like your water kind of bleeds into the areas, the dry areas, or what was dry, the parts of the tree that I'm trying to color green had a little bit of a wet spot from the keyhole moments of blue and lavender. Just, you know, just keep going. It's okay. It's all going to get wet eventually. And the one thing that I did differently with this example that I didn't do with my primary example was the blue tape. And so when we, you know, just go right up to the edge of the tape, if you've taped it down, and that is going to make it have such a lovely clean line when we're done. It's so satisfying to peel that blue tape off and see how this turns out, and where we'll have that clean edge where the tape is. Okay, so I've got my layer of green. And I'm adding the black, and I'm just doing a similar scribbling technique here, and I'll probably end up putting a whole nother layer of this on, but we want to get this as dark green as possible to start. And you can be a little heavy-handed with this black because it gets pretty dark. That's probably the darkest part of the photo, is up here at the edge of the picture frame where the trees are, and then down here in the bottom of the grass, which I didn't make quite as dark green in this example, but maybe we will with this one. And you can go to the edge of the tree line and do that hatching texture again to imitate the texture of the trees. And there's definitely patches within the tree that are darker than others. So I'm kind of bouncing around, looking at the photo and letting the black dominate in some areas, and then I'll let the green dominate in others, because the light from the glowy lights is creating a bit of a glow on the trees themselves. And having said that, maybe we want to put a little bit of ivory in the trees as well to help them glow a little bit, because now I'm remembering I did do that a little bit here. So go ahead and do that now. I can always add it later, but it doesn't hurt to go ahead and do it now. I'm going to do that on both trees. I think the further I got into this after creating the palette, I realized how much things needed to glow. And if yours is just not coming across quite the same as mine, then just keep going with this layer. And we can always add another layer. Like I said, I have probably 4 or 5 layers on that other example. I let that dry completely, and then I added more to it to really make it pop. And I will admit that I am experiencing that impatience that comes with this process of wanting to hurry up and see what will happen if I add the water to it. But the more patient you are in adding these layers, the more fulfilling it will be, I promise. And then, since we're on a different timeline, can you tell me how much time we have left in the hour? Oh, I think our moderator may have stepped away. I believe we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left here. I want some more emerald green on my tree on the other side here. I'm not giving this one quite as much attention as the other one. And if you want this to be even darker, you could always let it dry and add some pen on top of it as well. And we will definitely add some accents of pen to this, or I will in my example, before we are done in this 4-part series. I'll go ahead and add some black to these branches. Okay, I think I'm ready to add the first layer of water here. So again, I'm just kind of touching, getting a nice paintbrush full of water, and then just touching the watercolor pencil with it and letting it blend and bleed and do its own magical thing. So if you paint kind of back and forth in, you know, a horizontal brushstroke over and over, you're going to blend it together a lot. And I like to let things blend on their own. So we've done a lot of the legwork in the way that we are blending the watercolor pencils themselves, so that when we just touch it with the paintbrush, it's going to naturally puddle and pool and do some lovely things all by itself. And like I said, if it's giving you like an edge or a bleed line that you don't like and you want it to be more blended, try to be patient and wait for the next layer to blend that together. Because if you try to, you know, if you try to keep blending it right now, you might end up overdoing it or losing some of that quality that happens when we just do it gently like this and let the watercolor pencil blend together. So I'm cleaning my paintbrush because I got some of the blue, I think, on my paintbrush just then. And also I don't want to influence the blending on this tree too much from what was already on my paintbrush. So I cleaned it so that what's blending is the watercolor pencil that I drew right there. I can let that bleed together. So I'm starting with a clean paintbrush on this other tree. I think we have just enough time to do the grass, and then we will be saving middle ground stuff for next time, and more layers on the background. So we're mainly just getting the background here, the skies, the tree, and the grass. That's what we'll do next. Okay, so I had a question at the end of class when I did my little Instagram live, which I'm gonna hold off on tonight since we weren't able to have participants in tonight's class. But somebody was asking about the grass and which direction I colored my watercolor pencil here. And so or how do you know which direction to color? Like, would you color or, apply the watercolor pencil using, horizontal lines or vertical lines? And I actually used diagonal lines to apply that because, when we're looking at the directional curve of the surface of anything, you want to note what um, the directional lines are doing on the mass of, whatever it is itself. Like if it was a mountain, we might have diagonal lines that were going up and then back down the side of the mountain. Because there would be, jagged lines on rocks, etc. But here on this grass, we've got the shadow falling in a diagonal line. The grass itself is maybe, there might be a few little horizontal moments throughout the grass, but mostly I'm seeing even like the patches in the grass, it still seems to be traveling a diagonal path for me. So it maybe becomes a little more horizontal here at the top of the grass, but throughout the grass, it feels like it needs to be diagonal. Okay, so I'm going to use that emerald green again, although I did get in there, I know at the very end, and I should have done this on the swatch, but I think I used in one of my later layers, it's coming back to me now, I did use the yellow green. So if you wanted to go back to your swatch paper and add some of this yellow green to your emerald green and gray for the grass and see what that does. It gives it that really bright moment in the middle there. So I just added the yellow green on top. But I'm probably going to do that at the end or next in the next layer. So for this first layer, I do just want the emerald green. So I am going to keep it kind of horizontal near the house. We might put a little bit of black in there too. But as I get down here, I'm going to have it follow the same path as the shadow. So it's going to kind of accentuate the shadow. I'm going in between the fences. Try not to touch the fence too much so it won't end up being green. I'm shading or adding my my watercolor pencil, creating that tonal layer using diagonal lines. So it maybe isn't coming across so much there, but I'll make it come across here that I'm using diagonal lines. So if it wasn't apparent, I'm following a diagonal path here. And that's just going to help create depth. Honestly, it's just going to create a sense that there's like some elevation here. Turn my camera so you can see how I'm adding that in a diagonal line all the way down. So again, if I just added my water to this now without adding any more, it's going to look nice, but maybe not as nice as if I really fill this in and give, you know, my water and my paintbrush something to just huddle together. Add some black at the top here, underneath my little bench, and at the base of the house. So the reason you want to kind of paint from the background forward is, you know, if I had done the trees before the sky, for example, then when I added the sky, it maybe would have bled green into the sky. And so since I did it the other way, maybe some of the sky bled into the trees, but that's okay because the trees are in front of the sky. So you want to overlap things in a way or leave things blank that are in front, just in case there's some little moment that you want to. It's just easier that way. The other way to do it, I've seen people run into so many issues where they paint, you know, a tree first and then try to paint the sky in the little keyhole spaces in between it, and it always tends to go awry. So it's like, you know, you paint yourself into a corner, so to speak, when you do it that way. Like if I had done the fence first, then maybe as I'm filling in the color of the grass, the fence might want to bleed into the grass, and we want the grass to be pretty pure green, right? Okay, so I've got a lot of black in there. That I don't want the black to overtake it too much, but I do want it to be a little darker in the bottom quadrant foreground here than it was in my other example. So I'm going to add a little bit more black, kind of like the vignette thing that's happening in the photograph, and I didn't push that quite as much in my other example. The fun thing about doing two demos here is I can make adjustments as I see fit. And then I am going to go ahead and do some of that yellow green just because I know last time I didn't put it in at first, but I ended up needing it in the next layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do it so I don't have to wait for it to dry to add it. So I want it to be nice and bright there in the middle. After we add this, I think we will call it a night for part 3 in this series. It looks like we are almost out of time. I'm going to use a bigger paintbrush this time. I'm going to use this this brush. Get that nice and wet. Make sure my brush strokes are also following that same diagonal path. I want to let things pool the same as I was doing with the trees, but I also want to keep that diagonal path going. I've got a lot of dark black in these bottom corners, but I don't want that to bleed too much in the middle, so I'm going to keep to the areas that are darker while I've got that black and green on my brush. Then I'll clean my brush. Maybe I'll switch to a different brush for the middle here. Let me switch to my smaller flat brush for the middle, but still maintaining that diagonal brush stroke. I'm just doing it in a shorter little bursts here. And I'm going right up to the edge of the fence, leaving a little bit of space in between. And then can go back and fill those little gaps in. Oops. Okay, and if you accidentally paint onto the fence or anything like that, you can just blot it out with your paper towel while everything's wet. Okay, so that's it for layer 1 on the background. And we'll go ahead and stop there. And then next week we will complete adding our color with the watercolor pencils in part 4 of the series. And thank you all for joining me in the recorded version of this. And hopefully I'll see you in person or in person online on Zoom next week for part 4. Thank you, Jimena, our moderator, even though we didn't have any questions or anything tonight.
It's still a great class. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.